Hey everyone, I'm Owen, this is the American Machine, and I'm going to tell you about something that crawled under my skin today. So I've just learned of yet another group of people who are trying to strip rights away from women. Only this time it's not maternity leave or the right to vote or equal pay. No, it's legalized rape. This is, like so many things, one part of a larger thing. On the surface it's pretty basic sexual discrimination. But past that, it's a murky swamp of increasingly hateful, misogynistic levels, calling women the enemy and promising righteous retribution upon them in all manner of ways, now including legal rape. It is truly so horrible to think that there are so many men out there that so deeply hate all the women they've ever met, that they would think that not only raping them would be justice, but that it was their right. I feel dirty even mentioning it. The implications of this are so destructive and indicative of a larger problem in the U.S. These men, they are expressing their right to free speech and thought, and that right should always be protected, even for these douche canoes. But there is a limit. There is a point where something so inflammatory, so dangerously influential, creates real consequences in the real world. Sometimes even criminal ones. You see, the shouting fire in a crowded theater line was addressed in the Shenk versus United States Supreme Court case in the early 1900s, very turn of the century, wherein it was amended to falsely shouting fire. Let's call that the light end of the spectrum, okay? And at the other end of destructive influence, we have the case that the prosecutors brought against Charles Manson for influencing several people to commit several grisly murder. That case was particularly unique because it had never really been addressed in court before, and prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi had an uphill battle there. In his prosecution, he argued conspiracy to murder against Manson for the way that he directed the activities and ideology of the family. He, of course, prevailed in the end. So think about it. If these are the goalposts for dangerous influence, there is no shortage of examples that fill the gap in between. From the Santa Barbara shooter who is influenced by the men's rights movement online, to people totally crazed over Obama coming for your guns, influenced by partisan media and online extremism, or the digital nation of white supremacists complaining about the extermination of the white man in America and the way that they're preying on feeble minds and prejudices. We are talking about hate speech. And make no mistake, the men's rights movement has made it very clear how much they hate women. Their hate group status is well earned. When we see how this is influencing people, we have to ask ourselves how dangerous this really is. How much is too much? And what should the judicial response be? The majority of our peer nations have laws against hate speech, and the finery of which can be varied, but no less important. And what I think we need here is for the courts to go a little further into the definition of hate speech, and how to respond to it. But how do we get to that point? There has to be some kind of a legal grievance to bring it into a courtroom. And for these woman-hating walking bags of dicks, I think I might just have something. In Illinois, at least, all state employees are mandatory reporters for children at risk of abuse or neglect. Meaning, all state employees are legally bound to report any kind of activity they think might be suspect to the authorities for investigation. Otherwise, they might face possible consequences or culpability. Now, a lot of these men's rights activists actually do have women in their lives, believe it or not. Wives, girlfriends, sons, daughters. The question I want the courts to answer is this. This is the challenge. Is a child at a reasonable risk of abuse or neglect in the presence of somebody advocating for legalized rape? In the presence of somebody who looks at women of every age as the enemy? We are talking about legalized rape, but the slightly darker implication here is just how far from child molestation are their ideals. Hell, I'm an older brother with 2 younger sisters, and I have spent my entire life trying to protect them from walking tool bags like these guys. I also happen to know a lot of women. They're pretty common, actually. And believe you me, whether rape were legal or not, if I found a woman being attacked, her attacker would get a new definition of forcible penetration. It's terrible to think about, I know, but we have to open that can of worms just to see if they all fit back in there. And I think such a case could be brought by anybody who's a mandatory reporter. The grievance would come through Child Services, likely seeing a definition and policy requirements and limitations. In this way, we can re-examine the legal structure around hate speech, and if deemed necessary, redraw the line with a new precedent in court. So in the end, I don't actually think any of these men would lose their children, go to jail or pay any fines, or even anything like being labeled like a sex offender. I don't think that would happen. But right now, their hateful and destructive rhetoric and other hate groups of other stripes, it has done real measurable damage in our communities. And we allow them to proliferate in the shallow end of the First Amendment, at least until they falsely shout fire, like the makers of the highly edited Planned Parenthood attack videos. Please understand, I don't have the answer. I'm just trying to find a way to find the solution. We already know that hate speech and propaganda and misinformation are the precursors to extremism, violent extremism at that, be it for race, gender, religion, insert any modifier. It is not, in fact, mental illness, but anger that is at the core of mass shootings and other violent crimes. And that common denominator is driven by hate groups like the men's rights movement and their vacuous rhetoric. And as long as we look away and pretend that the current laws are adequate, we will never be able to stem the rising tide of violence that is flooding the American machine. Thank you for watching.